It's easy to hear your favorite artist on WFPK from wherever you are. Listen on your smart speaker, live stream from our website at WFPK.org, from Louisville Public Media.
Consequence Podcast Network.
Welcome to another edition of Kyle Meredith with the interview series presented by WFPK Independent Louisville at WFPK.org, Consequence of Sound, and the Consequence Podcast Network. Before we get started, let me appeal to your better nature that if you are not a subscriber to this series, I really do hope you take that moment to do so, to become a subscriber. We put out multiple interviews every single week, new interviews every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday with so many artists across so many genres. It is a really fun way to keep up with what's going on and new releases and reissues and anniversaries and everything like that. So do what you need to do to subscribe. You can do so iTunes and Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Stitcher, Podchaser, any of those places. Anywhere you get your podcast from, you can subscribe. I'm Kyle Meredith, and today my guest, I'll be talking with Derek Sanders. You know him as the lead singer of Mayday Parade. He has put out his very first solo EP called My Rock and Roll Heart. Now, if that lyric sounds familiar, maybe it's because it comes from a Jimmy Eat World song called a praise chorus. And in fact, all 5 songs on this EP are covers. Derek's gone back to his teenage years and coming of age years to look at some of the songs from bands like Jimmy Eat World and Saves the Day, Something Corporate, the Juliana Theory. So we'll be talking about a lot of those and why he chose to do this EP. In fact, it stems back from a song called Goodbye Love from a Tallahassee band from the late 90s called But Lauren. It's a band that most of us have never heard of, and there's a reason for that. We'll get the backstory on all of that, as well as sort of take a look at the wider picture. You know, a lot of these songs, they could be categorized if you want to put them in the genre, you know, punk pop and emo and whatever else kind of came out of those subgenres. And 20 years on, it's not only Derek that's looking back, but there's a resurgence right on time as music trends seem to happen. So we're definitely going to dive into that as well and get an update. Derek will tell you this is maybe the first in a whole series of these kind of EPs, but his concentration is in fact on the Mayday Parade. He says they're working on a new record which should be coming along. I've got to ask some questions about it, especially as a band who is politically engaged, at least online. Should we be expecting those themes in the new record? So let's jump into it, talking about the EP, My Rock and Roll Heart. It's Kyle Meredith with Derek Sanders.
Hey, how you doing?
I am enjoying this EP, My Rock and Roll Heart, so much. And I guess we'll start with the obvious stuff right here. So why this EP and why now?
Well, first of all, thank you for the compliment. It's really something that I've thought about doing for a long time, you know, some sort of, solo acoustic thing or whatever. And it's always been kind of in the back of my mind of like, you know, eventually I'd like to get around to doing that. And, you know, it's been 14 years since we started Mayday Parade, which is just a crazy amount of time. And it's like, if I don't do it now, then I probably never will, you know. And actually, it was sort of these steps that happened going back almost 3 years ago when I recorded the first song almost 3 years back. It was the cover of But Lauren that I recorded for my wife, whose name is Lauren, for a Valentine's Day gift, basically. And then it kind of, from there, I showed it to Mike Hansen, the guy who wrote that song, and he suggested that more people should hear it, and I should put it out in some way. And then, you know, the wheels started turning, and it kind of just grew from there. And now here we are, just on the verge of putting it out. So it's really exciting, and it's been a long time in the works.
I should say most of the tracks on here, all the other tracks are from bands that we are very familiar with, but Lauren is the one, that's the obscurity, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's one thing that's is really cool about it. That, you know, Mike was in a couple bands in Tallahassee and never really broke out, I guess, but had a cool following here, and I loved going to his shows. And this is almost 20 years ago that we're talking about. So I'm stoked that people get to hear his music in one form, you know, and it's really cool.
And hearing you talk about, you know, how a lot of this music does trace back to your coming of age years, whatever you want to call that, teens and 20s. I thought, you know, using that But Lauren band as kind of the jumping off point, the platform, because now looking back 2 decades, what was music at that time like for you? I mean, what was that local scene like?
It was incredible, really. It was a very special time and place. And I now, obviously I'm not as connected with it, but I feel like things have changed so much, and there aren't as many bands around here, and there aren't as many shows around here. But there was such a cool scene in Tallahassee. There were so many bands, so many great bands, and a lot of people that we were all friends, and we, practiced in the same. There was a couple different like warehouses around town that a bunch of bands would kind of share time with and hang out and play shows together and go to shows together. It was just it was a whole community for a pretty long period of time, and I feel like really inspired me and influenced me in so many ways. And it's some of my favorite music that exists in the world is some of these bands from Tallahassee that nobody really knows.
It's interesting too, because obviously now we can look back and see that something different was happening right then in music. I mean, what things that would eventually be called, emo and punk pop and all this stuff was coming on the rise and everything. And were you aware that this was something different happening with music at that time?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was hard to know exactly what it was, but or what it would become or anything. But it was definitely, I feel like I was like the right age for all when this kind of all happened. It felt like it was this underground thing for a while that we kind of got connected to, and you sort of saw it just, build and explode. And that was, right around the time that we started to play this kind of music. And because I've been playing music and loved music going back since I was a young kid. And my older brother kind of got me into just rock music, really. And would show me all different kinds of bands. I was really into 90s rock and then a lot of classic rock. And I started playing music when I was about 10. And, once I was, I guess, about, 14 or so is when I started getting into these bands, Jimmy Eat World and Saves the Day and, New Found Glory and all that. And really just kind of, changed my world and especially musically. And it was just such a cool time. And I had no idea if these were just like small bands that were going to be small bands forever. And we were just like this tiny little scene, but it, now of course it's this huge thing, and it's how long it's lasted, and the fact that there's people that have grown up with it that it still means a lot to them. I think is really cool, and it's not just like a phase, and it's a powerful thing.
Of course, it's right on time with the way trends work. I mean, genres, they have their peaks and maybe plateau for a little bit, but we're 20 years on, and it seems like this EP couldn't be more perfectly timed, because I'm seeing that everywhere again. Like a lot of these bands, whether or not they ever left or took a break or anything, but it seems like the spotlight is a lot heavier, and maybe even, as, being part of a band like Mayday Parade. I don't know if you can see that as well, or if you're maybe too in the thick of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say, but I definitely think, there's like these bands that have they're kind of like legendary in a sense, like a lot of, these early bands that I, Jimmy Eat World and Juliana Theory and Saves the Day are kind of like, they've, at least to me, and I feel like to a lot of people, like they're like these legends, and it's such a cool thing. And yeah.
Well, that one especially, I'll hit Jimmy Eat World there, and you've got the first single with a praise chorus. Let's first say Bleed American is easily one of the greatest albums of all time. And I would love to hear how, your connection came with that record, because I know it means a lot to me.
It is undoubtedly one of the greatest albums ever, especially one of the greatest rock albums ever. And actually, for me, Clarity, the one before that one, is my personal favorite Jimmy Eat World album, and it's one of my top three albums of all time for me. I just love Clarity so much. And then Bleed American, of course, it's right up there. It's so close to, as my second favorite. But yeah, it was cool because I had, not so like cool guy or whatever, but I got into Clarity, and then it wasn't like super well known, and then Bleed American kind of blew up, and I had a lot of friends that were talking about like, oh, there's this new band, Jimmy Eat World, and I was like, oh man, like I've been on a new band, I've been listening to them for years. But anyway, like that was it was so cool the way they blew up on that album, and it's just it rocks so hard, and the song and praise chorus is just undeniable and such a great song, and it works really well doing an acoustic like this, and having Daniel Lancaster sing on it was very cool. And
do you remember that record was one of the 9/11 releases?
Right. They changed the name of it, right? It's officially, or it became self-titled after that, right?
Yeah, and I think they didn't flip it back until the deluxe edition came out. That was my very first gig in radio when I got to be a music director. That was the very first choice I got to make, and they weren't pushing the middle yet. They were pushing the title track with Bleed American. And I thought this is going to be, because I knew the Lucky Denver Met single. I didn't know the Clarity record, but I knew that single and I thought this is going to be huge. And I put my stake in that song so hard and it disappeared completely a week later. So it was a weird time,
Absolutely, yeah.
But I do love the way you all did it. And again, so Daniel Lancaster, can you put the spotlight on him and tell us about Daniel too? Because he takes the bridge in the song with the Tommy James parts.
Right, yeah. So Daniel's somebody I've known for, a long time, since I was probably about 18 years old. And he's Jason Lancaster's younger brother. Jason was in Mayday Parade for the first year. And Daniel's just a super talented dude and a great guy. And we've always kind of, tried to work on music together when we get the chance. And this specific song kind of came together. We both were playing an event for a friend of ours, kind of just like a somewhat of a charity kind of thing. And we talked about doing a song together, and I told him I was doing a praise chorus, and he wanted to come sing it with me. So he came out, and this was before I had tracked the song for the cover, and I just loved the way it sounded live with him. And so when I did the song, of course I asked him to come over to my house and sing it, and he did, and it was great. And then he'll actually be coming out these shows that I'm doing. He's going to be coming out and playing acoustic as well, so he'll come up and sing that song with me, and should be a special thing.
So what else do we expect from the tour? I mean, you're just doing it's just a handful of dates on this, right?
Yeah, it's just 3 shows. I mean, I kind of wanted to keep it simple and just do something kind of around the release. We're actually, Mayday Parade's kind of gearing up to go into the studio to record some songs, so kind of a lot going on. And but that's kind of the idea with this, and part of what's really nice about it is that I can, when we have these breaks of a month and a half or so, with Mayday Parade touring and whatnot, I can easily just jump out and do a couple shows here and there and keep it as simple as that. I don't know that I'll really, go out on any long stretch of touring necessarily with this, but hopefully kind of make my way around, and it's easy enough for me just to fly with my guitar and play a few shows here and there, just fill in some of those gaps. So this is kind of just the beginning of that, really.
Yeah. Now, do you plan on mixing some of the Mayday Parade songs in there with covers and whatever else?
I've been working on, all of that, and I'm looking at a list in front of me of all the, potential songs that I might play for this. And I'll probably, I think I've, kind of settled on doing just one Mayday Parade song, because I've been torn between, on the one side of it, I don't want to make the guys feel weird about any of this, and if I'm off playing a bunch of Mayday Parade songs by myself, I feel like that's just kind of a strange thing. But then on the other hand, I know that a lot of folks coming to these shows would maybe want to hear some Mayday stuff, and so I figure if I can just play one song at the end, maybe kind of keep everybody happy and make it work like that. But then I'm also doing the 5 covers on the EP. I'll do a handful more covers, and then there's a handful of songs that I've written that I've just never done anything with that I'll be playing as well. And so it's a pretty solid mix.
So it sounds like there's an opportunity, like this is the first of maybe a series of this sort of acoustic thing. I mean, do you plan on getting to that other stuff and keeping this going?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the idea. And, again, with all this, I feel like this is kind of a side, it's a side project, and I'm putting most of my focus and energy into Mayday Parade as always. But I do want to get back, and I've actually already have recorded a handful of these original songs I've talked about that I haven't done anything with. I've recorded, and I plan to release at some point in some way. And then I'm actually already interested in doing more of these covers. I love the way these all turned out, and they were so much fun to do, and they're a lot of fun to play live. So I kind of figure, why not just kind of keep doing that. And I've recorded all this stuff at my house so far, so it's easy to just do whenever I have some free time. So yeah, I do plan on continuing to record more music and play more shows and see how it all goes.
That's exciting. Well, in the meantime, I know, as you mentioned, you got more dates with Mayday Parade. I also saw you guys are doing, maybe it's already happened, but the vinyl sales went to Gift of Adoption.
Right. So that was kind of a different. There were 2 bands that came together to form Mayday Parade. There was a band called Defining Moment and a band called Kid Named Chicago. And that's kind of, when I mentioned that period of time where all these bands, played shows together and were friends, those 2 bands were very close. And that's Mayday Parade sort of formed from members of each of those bands, leaving those bands and coming together to form Mayday Parade. But there's music from both those older bands that still means a lot to us and to some people. And so we decided to press some of those songs onto a vinyl. We just kind of self-released it. And because there's so many people involved with it, and we didn't want, there to be, money to really even be a consideration. It was just kind of, this is a cool thing to do. Let's put it out and let's, give all the profits to a charity. And we, chose the Gift of Adoption Fund, which is great, and they help people, finance their adoptions, and they don't discriminate based on, race or gender or sexual preference or any of that. So, and then we did a show. We did an acoustic show back the day after Thanksgiving in November where I played some old Defining Moment songs acoustic, and Jason played some Kid Named Chicago songs acoustic, and then we got together at the end and did Jimmy All Over together, and it was a cool thing. It was a very cool event, and I'm really happy with how that all turned out, and glad to have been a part of that.
Yeah, no, I love hearing that you guys are a part of stuff like that and everything. And I know you stay engaged like the rest of us. And does the band become part of the campaign trail this year? Do you all see your voice being used in that way?
Yeah, I mean, we've always had a hard time, I guess, finding that ground, or where we, because there's between the five of us, we all agree on a lot of things, but there's it's in the past we've kind of had a rule of just staying out of any of that. But I think recently that's kind of opened up more, and we try not to go too nuts with our personal opinions and putting them into our music and our message and everything. But I feel like things are just so crazy in the world right now, and we're in this position where people listen to the things that we say, and it seems you don't want to waste that, and you want the world to be a better place and make your impact be a positive one, and so I feel like we're kind of just navigating that. But yeah.
Well, I appreciate it. And Derek, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for the time, and congratulations. I really do love this EP, My Rock and Roll Hearts. I can't wait to hear what other covers comes on the next round.
That's awesome, man. I appreciate that. Thanks for having me.
All right, man. Take care.
All right, take it easy.
And my thanks, Derek Sanders. Again, the new EP, My Rock and Roll Hearts. Check that out as we look forward to the next release from the Mayday Parade as well. It's exciting. And thanks to you, by the way, for checking out the series. Again, if you haven't already, become a subscriber. YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts from. And maybe if you get some inspired, you can give the series a rating, leave a review as well. After that, head to WFPK.org, where I do a show Monday through Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern. It's an hour full of song premieres and music news, anniversary spins, and bonus interviews as well. Again, that's WFPK.org. Consequence of Sound, they've got your music and film news. You can find me on any social media platform at Kyle Meredith. And that does it for another edition. I'm Kyle Meredith. I'll see you next time.
Consequence Podcast Network.
I'm Leo Phillips, host of This Must Be the Gig. We're a weekly podcast that documents everything about the world of live music, speaking with choreographers, costume and set designers, the people who run beloved venues and festivals, and, of course, speaking with musicians about that one gig that changed their lives. Get your peek behind the curtain at consequenceofsound.net, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.